Okay. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining and welcome to the Coexistence in Practice webinars hosted by the Coexistence Consortium. Before we start the talk, I would like to give a brief introduction about us, the Coexistence Consortium, and the structure of this webinar. The Coexistence Consortium is a network of conservation researchers and practitioners from many diverse disciplines, united by a common vision to understand the intricate dynamics of coexistence between humans and wildlife. Our mission extends beyond the conservation of wild animals confined to remote forest pockets. We emphasize the importance of living well with nature, even in our immediate surroundings. Our collective long-term vision is to employ an experimental and evidence-based approach to catalyze a variety of context-specific human-wildlife coexistence projects across the world. The structure of the webinar is as follows. Our speaker, Nitin Shekhar, will be presenting for about 40 to 45 minutes, which will be followed by a question and answer and discussion session for about 20 minutes. I now request Tash, who's the consortium member, to introduce our speaker for the evening. Over to you, Tash.
Thanks, Ravi. And of course, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nitin Shekhar. I've known him for some time. I don't remember exactly when we started, when we were in touch with each other, but I guess maybe when you were doing your PhD with him, when we kind of exchanged some emails through Professor Sukumar, who was vaguely involved with both of us. But I got to know him a lot better through the Coexistence Consortium when we worked very closely to get this all off the ground. So Nitin is quite uniquely placed in that he's always been really interested in this question of welfare. And animal welfare in India, for I don't know most people who are involved, most people in conservation think that the kind of welfare of individual animals doesn't matter. It's about saving species, and it's about kind of generalizing rather than kind of going down to the individual and worrying about the welfare of that animal. And that perspective has been really unique, something that all of us, I think, care about. And what's particularly interesting is that it isn't the other extreme of a kind of animal rights activism where the life of one animal is often more important than the kind of wider questions and challenges in conservation, like on an individual tiger or an elephant or things like that. So Nitin has always been really great at taking that middle path about caring about individuals, but still allowing for that to kind of be a part of the complexity of conservation and not ignoring the rights of local communities and things like that. He is also a great kind of natural scientist among us. I think most of us at the consortium, when we kind of got things off the ground, um, were more interested in local communities. And Nitin was always interested in kind of communities and things like that. But that balance of relying heavily on data and willing to kind of change his position and his take based on what the data and the information was telling him was something I've been particularly inspired by over the years of interacting with him. And though we disagreed hell of a lot, which is what Nitin joked about in the beginning, we've had some very serious disagreements. I've always had an amazing amount of respect for his ability to be quite objective about things and not uh, let his feelings kind of take over entirely. Um, there's a great paper in Science, I think, that he managed to pull off a couple of years ago, commentary on this whole question of animal welfare. And I think he is one of the kind of foremost uh, in thinking about this. And I'm really looking forward to this. Thanks, Nitin. It will be great to hear what you're going to say about elephants and chickens.
Thanks, Darsh. I'm very excited that that introduction was recorded. But I no, I mean, like, if Darsh invited me to be a part of the Coexistence Consortium, I think basically at the outset, well, we're trying to get this thing off the ground because he and the others involved really wanted to balance the different perspectives, and I hope that I have been wise enough to update my perspective as I've learned from all everyone, but Tharsh in particular, and actually, Tharsh, you're gonna have to help me a bit with this presentation, because the way I've structured it. So I um, from the outset, I think one of the roles I was expected to play as a member of the consortium was to sort of bring this perspective on animal welfare and animal well-being to the mix. And I think that historically, I'm getting a little nervous giving presentations. I tend to be very, very, very particular about making sure that everything is impeccable and all that. And I just actually haven't had time to do that this time. So I want to try something a little bit different. I sort of started breaking a bit with what Ravi said. I'm going to kind of share a few slides at a time and then try and actually orchestrate a bit of a discussion, if that's okay. And so then just get some more perspectives and give people a chance to sort of test the ideas we're putting out there, and see what's going on. I'm sure all of you know that there are, in this group of people, some of the leaders of our field, have the folks who help establish conservation and coexistence work in India and globally. So I know there's a tendency to deference towards those leading voices. I'm going to try and make sure that no, small number of people end up dominating the conversation. Except for me, I'll dominate because I'm the presenter. So just like please bear with me as I try and I want folks to use the hand raising thing in your tool on your screen to tell me to indicate that you want to participate. And I'll just call on people and try and rotate through to make sure that different people get a chance to speak. Does that work for everyone? Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, Paul. It works for you? Okay, awesome. Thanks, Amrit. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually use this hand raising tool to start with. So I want to take a poll. So the question is, how many of you believe that animals? Let's focus on mammals and birds. How many of you believe that mammals and birds are capable of experiencing joy, happiness, contentment, some positive emotions, and pain or suffering? So negative experiences as well. Please put your hand up if you believe that mammals and birds have this capacity. I'll wait a minute as everyone finds the tool and checks. If you don't believe, don't put your hand up. I'll ask you in a second. Okay. Okay. All right. So now time's up. Please put your hands down, everyone who has your hands up. Okay. So now raise your hand if you do not believe that they have this capacity. So if you're not sure, that's fine. You don't have to put your hand up for either. But how many of you believe that you proactively believe that mammals and birds lack the capacity for feeling these positive and negative valence emotions and experiences? Okay. All right. I don't see a single hand up. So that's a good place to start. So then I will not linger too much on my early slides. Um, so okay, so my understanding is that there's a scientific consensus that mammals and birds have vibrant inner lives that includes the ability to experience joy, experience pain, experience suffering. Um, and just a few examples of this, like consensus declarations on this point. Back in 2012, a bunch of neuroscientists and cognitive psychology experts got together and they wrote the Cambridge Declaration that says that the weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates. More recently, last year, there was the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness, signed by over 500 folks, including people like me, Rana, that says which animals have the capacity for conscious experience. While much uncertainty remains, some points of wide agreement have emerged. First, there's strong scientific support for attribution of conscious experience to other mammals and to birds. Wait, am I sharing my screen? I'm not, right?
No, you're not.
Oh, shoot. My bad.
You're
Okay.
not.
I was quite impressed thinking you're going to speak without the touching screen. Good job.
Can people see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. I was going on Mahesh Rangaraj on you guys for a while. So this is the Cambridge Declaration of Conscience. That's the only thing that you missed. So, all right. So yeah, so the strong scientific support for attributions of conscious experience of other mammals and to birds. Second, the empirical evidence indicates at least a realistic possibility of conscious experience in all vertebrates, including reptiles, amphibians, and fishes, and many invertebrates. Third, when there's a realistic possibility of conscious experience in an animal, it is irresponsible to ignore that possibility in decisions affecting that animal. We should consider welfare risks and use the evidence to inform our responses to these risks. And so, my last piece of evidence that I'll submit here is that even ChatGPT seems to agree that this isn't really an area of active scientific disagreement. There's no meaningful doubt that mammals and birds can experience pain and suffering. I won't read this to you guys, but you get the basic idea, right? So in some sense, you can kind of draw a parallel between this and climate change, right? With climate change, it's we only have one planet, right? We do not have the capacity to do a randomized control trial across planets to see how human activities affect the climate. But you have a pretty overwhelming amount of empirical evidence, both showing like the mechanics of how greenhouse gases affect the climate and how those things could affect other parts of the geophysical cycle, biogeochemical cycles. And you make an inference. And the vast majority of scientists have made the inference that based on that evidence, human-induced climate change is a real thing. In this case, we will never actually know exactly what an elephant or a chicken or a rat or an octopus or another animal experiences. But based on the structure of nervous systems, of endocrine systems, based on the way they behave, based on the physiological response to stresses, the inference is that that they're probably quite a bit like us. And so, just kind of focusing a little bit on our main protagonists here, elephants. So, in addition to being able to have the capacity for these generally positive and negative emotions, as all mammals and birds seem to have, they have other attributes of sentience. So they can modify tools. I've actually seen this. They modify branches to swat flies. In the Washington Zoo, they did this experiment showing that an elephant could spontaneously use a box as a step stool to grab something that he wanted to eat. Many of us who work in the field have noticed that elephants are able to figure out how to use stones and logs as tools to deactivate fences and so on and so forth. Elephants pass the mirror self-recognition test, at least some of them do, where it's clear that they recognize themselves in a mirror. There's another elephant in the Washington Zoo that was given access to a harmonica, and the way she used the harmonica caused people to question whether she was actually composing music because there's a pattern to the sounds that she was making. Elephants respond excitedly to the sounds of deceased relatives, but not that of strangers. Actually, this is a tragic experiment that was done where in Amboseli, I believe, where they played the voice of a deceased elephant to her former herd, and the herd got really excited and ran towards the speaker because they thought that maybe their deceased relative was back from the dead. In fact, they never repeated that experiment because they realized that there are ethical implications to doing it. Elephants often exhibit empathy, trying to help injured individuals support their weight. Mothers will carry calves for days after their death and guard them. There's a great paper by Sanjita and Nashikita about that. And elephants often examine the bodies and bones of dead conspecific as though they were, remembering the relation that they had with them. So chickens, are not as it seems as intelligent, not intelligent in the same ways as we recognize elephants to be, but they also seem to have quite a bit going on inside. There's one paper that basically where they imprinted chicks on objects and then tried to understand whether the chicks were able to do basic math. So would they go to the screen that had more objects hidden behind them? So these two screens were set up, and say first one in for this screen they put one and then two objects. In this screen they put two and then one object, or maybe they did one at a time. And so they did this in various different ways. It ultimately showed that the chicks were able to track which one had more objects behind it. So some basic capacity for numeracy or quantification seems to be going on. There's another study where these researchers wanted to see whether mother hens responded to potential threats or risk of suffering to themselves, to chicks, and to other individuals of their same species. And the way they do this is they had like little, they kind of, I guess they put the hen and the other individuals, either another hen or the chicks, in slightly separate compartments where they can see each other, and they take puffs of air and they puff the air at either the hen or the chicks or both. And so the puff of air is not actually dangerous, but it is something that's novel. It's some small exhibition of force. And so what the researchers wanted to see was whether the hens became concerned when these puffs of air were being put on their chicks. And all of their physiological responses suggested that the hens did have concern, had some empathy, potential empathy, for these chicks. Interestingly, the same study did not find any evidence of hens having concern for other hens being puffed with air. But at least from the mother to offspring case, there's some evidence of that. And I'm gonna actually just quickly see if I can share this part of this video. Um, you'll bear with me. Okay, so this is just a hen as a pet. Can you see it? There, thumbs up.
आज कल नहीं मुझे कॉल करते रहे आंटी को तो मैं तो नहीं हुई मैं भी तो यहाँ पे रही हूँ
Yeah, so basically, you know, this rooster is behaving in the same way that we often see pets as behaving, right? So um, the feelings we have towards dogs, cats, horses, etc., might also reasonably apply to these animals. Can people see my screen again? Darsh, we good? Can you see my screen? Awesome. Okay. So we often treat both elephants and chickens poorly, right? Like and elephants in captivity and temple events, etc., often aren't, their welfare isn't really considered. But at least at a global scale, I think it's pretty clear that chickens have it much worse. So since the 1960s, when there was a little bit less than 10 billion chickens that were being grown for agriculture, for meat, now the number of chickens alone has gotten close to 70, 80 billion. And it's believed that of those, in the US, 99% are grown in concentrated animal farming operations. About 80% in India is what I read before I left. So I don't know if it's gone up or down a couple years ago. And globally, it's about 75%, right? So there are chickens like the ones that I saw at Tharsh's place that seem to have they have a seemingly a pretty good life, right? They're able to roam around and express their natural behaviors, but that doesn't actually apply to all chickens. Um, so and so like the you know when you look at the chickens in this from a zoomed out view, it's hard to understand what they're going through. But animals in these intensive operations are often they're selectively grown so that they can produce as much meat as possible. Right? We're breeding them to produce a lot of meat, but we don't breed them to have good lives. And so what that means is that the amount of meat that are on their bones strains their joints and their skeletons. It means that a lot of them aren't able to support their weight or walk properly. They can be lame. They can break their hips. It leads to organic or organ failure in a lot of situations because their lungs and hearts can't quite maintain all this extra body mass. Them being crowded in such conditions, they're living in their own poop. There's a lot of risk of infection from avian influenza, bacterial infections. As you know, there's often culling of large numbers of the animals because they get sick in a way that could affect us. But we don't really, we're not really monitoring how they feel when they're getting sick. They aren't, because they're not able to do their natural behaviors a lot of the time. Maybe they're not able, in some cases, not able to dust bathe. You've seen the ones in India that kept in cages a lot of the time, not able to perch, like the one in the video. They get frustrated, and they can become aggressive against each other. There's even incidents of feather pecking and cannibalism of other individuals because of all these strains. And yeah, so anyway, you get the idea. I could go on and on, but I mean, like, if we were to picture hell for individual, I mean, like, this is worth in the Matrix, right? Like, it is we're raising tens of billions of animals every year, killing them and eating them at the end. I'm sure animals don't want that, but even during their lives, they are treated quite poorly. So I guess the question I want to ask, and explore just a little bit with the remaining time here, is what does this mean for conservation and coexistence? Coexistence, I think, as a framework, has been about bringing empathy, fairness, and respect to conservation, right? Western conservation started out as an elite enterprise to make sure that, mostly wealthy people, mostly wealthy white people, had access to big natural areas and could see big game, to hunt them often, but to enjoy them in one way or the other. And to me, the coexistence movement is part of a gradual effort to correct that with respect to the vast majority of humanity, making sure that the communities that live alongside wildlife, that have made their survival possible despite the onslaught of modernization, that they are treated respectfully, that their ability to access and engage with nature and other species is fair and equitable compared to those of elites, and that we have empathy for everyone involved. At least that's to me that's what coexistence represents in conservation. And I guess the question is, can we bring that to bear for animals as well, given the overwhelming evidence that so many of them suffer, right? What does it look like? Um, and so one thing, this is the paper that Darsh referenced, that we published in Science. One thing that we found while we were researching this paper is that conservation organizations do not formally value animal welfare. So we took because Science is a US-based organization, we took the 10 biggest conservation organizations in the US based on budget, as well as the IUCN, the Society for Conservation Biology, and we looked at their values, their missions, their policies, etc., to see if they mention animal welfare. None of them mention it in their mission or their vision. None of them have a comprehensive policy. Greenpeace and Sierra Club had, at the time, this is back in 2020, specific policies that had to do with animal welfare in particular contexts, including food animals, right? So-called food animals, chickens, pigs, etc. Um, but I think the Sierra Club is the only one that had a policy explicitly about animal welfare. But at some point or the other, someone in the conservation organization will say something about animal welfare. So, like WWF Pakistan had a statement against cetaceans in captivity, so dolphins and whales, because they felt that there's no way for them to do well in captivity. Yes, Simon, exactly. The IUCN is in yellow because the crocodile specialist group does include statements about crocodile welfare. But there's also quite a bit of back and forth, though, in the IUCN literature about whether animal welfare should be a consideration. So, but yeah, to take your point, so the 2 points here, one is that there are individuals across the organization that care about this, and this does come up every now and then, but it's not systematically addressed, is the main point. And that's funny because there are pretty comprehensive policy. Thank you, Simon. There are pretty comprehensive policies on other things that aren't necessarily about biodiversity or even community. So there, we found policies about avoiding corruption, promoting multiculturalism, prohibiting unnecessary travel. We found an anti-gossip policy, anti-human trafficking policy, anti-fraud policies. These are all, these are good policies. I'm for all of these policies, right? But the question is, when our work is so intimately tied with animal life, why don't we also have comprehensive animal welfare policies? The IUCN, which, as Simon says, does have every now and then a smattering of statements on animal welfare, some pro animal welfare and some disregarding it explicitly. The organization has a business and finance group, all these groups that are up here: climate change, freshwater insecurity, protected area and land use, and importantly, governance and law and rights, right? And these are all, I think, important um, parts of conservation and coexistence. But there is one for animal welfare and animal well-being, even though so much of what we do directly bears on that. Okay. So the thing I want to do moving forward is I just have a few basic example case studies, or not example, just scenarios about how animal welfare, incorporating animal welfare into conservation, what it might look like or how we might evaluate things differently if we do that. But I want to stop quickly and say, like, are there any questions or confusions or concerns? I'm just going to give 5 minutes for that and then I'll move on. You can raise your hand and I'll call on you if there are any. And if not, I'll keep going. Okay. Darsh, go ahead. Yes, sir.
I mean, I think Ethan, a lot of this hinges on how we define what conservation is. And I think the problem is it means different things to different people. In its very purest, old school definition, it's preserving or allowing for the continued existence of other species or preventing extinction. Right? In that case, if it's just that you want other animals to persist, then there is no room for any of what we're talking, empathy, kind of connection with animals, anything. It is just ensuring animals persist. So I think that definition is worth, yeah, I mean, there's lots there to talk about, but that definition of conservation kind of foregrounds whether welfare is relevant to conservation at all or not.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the one thing that's happened, because large part because of amazing work in places like India, is that very narrow version of conservation has been, as you know, been expanded to include communities, at least in some contexts, right? At least aspirationally, all these big NGOs now have policies on free, prior, and informed consent and human rights and so forth. And so it was a flawed structure. Well, in my opinion, flawed. It was a narrow structure to begin with, as you in the way you defined it, and it's been expanded in this extremely critical way to include human well-being, the human equity of all people's access and interaction with nature. And so I guess the thing that I would love to see, and I think should happen, is that same similar expansion should happen to embrace animal welfare and animal well-being as well. So it's about broadening the definition of what conservation is, or if we don't like if that definition is stuck, getting rid of conservation and making coexistence or making some other paradigm the one that matters. Um, any other questions or comments? Okay. Oh, so one from Simon. We can all read it real fast. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Simon. I think that the coexistence paradigm helps break down in one of these kind of arbitrary silos. we kind of building on what Darsh said, conservation is really not is about making sure animals persist, right? As wild animals persist, well, initially, and then maybe all wild species persist. But it was it kind of just set an arbitrary boundary between domestic species and wild species. Then over time, as certain breeds of domestic species started disappearing, it became about okay, there was at least some concern around that as well. Um, but as you have real coexistence happening, and you have there's a raccoon that comes and climbs in our in the house, the gutter in the house across from me right now all the time. There are mice living in my house right now, unfortunately. Like we're all these animals are half wild, half domesticated. They, when you release, when I've caught and releases the mouse, I'm really worried. I don't think a lot of them are going to make it because they're used to living inside. So this line between wild and domestic has been gradually blurred, which I think also makes it maybe easier to think about animal welfare in a comprehensive way, and complicated. Um, Yeah, and compassionate conservation. Thanks, Paul. So compassionate conservation is a movement that's been explicitly trying to bring animal concerns about animals into. Yeah, Paul, please go ahead. Yeah,
It's regarding compassionate conservation. So I've worked at it for a long time.
I can't. I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you very well at all, Paul. Is
Yeah.
it just me?
No, I
Can
can't
you hear
hear
me?
either.
Can you hear me?
It's a little broken and soft.
Yeah, maybe yes. If you yell a bit, maybe it'll work. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
What about now? Okay, I'll just ask in the comments, I guess.
No, you can speak
Yeah.
up.
Sorry, Paul.
We can hear you now.
Okay, I just wanted to know your views on compassionate conservation, because I mean, from whatever I've heard from conservation organizations in India, pretty much all of them are anti-animal rights, even anti-animal welfare. I would say that many of them even claim that to be a true wildlife biologist, you have to eat wild animals. I've heard this from conservationists. So, how do you think you would, you know, preach this message that you are trying to do now with conservation organizations in India?
Yeah. I think that the general sort of the primary impulse, I guess, of the compassion conservation world is something I at least relate to, which is the same idea, right? That animals can can suffer and experience joy, and that should be part of um our calculations when we make decisions around them, around conservation or animals in general. But I think that they're a lot of them are the a lot of that group has started, for instance, in Australia, and they have started very much in Western context, and so their concerns are often oriented to those contexts. So, for instance, in Australia, there's a lot of efforts to kill invasive species that have been introduced by people, whether they be rabbits or foxes or camels or even dingoes, which came long ago to Australia with Aboriginal people are seen as non-native in some by some Australians, and so they do a lot to kill those animals, and often in ways that are quite cruel. They use poisons that cause the animal to suffer quite a bit after they eat it. In New Zealand, they released a virus, myxotosis, I think is the name of the virus, but basically the virus spreads to all these rabbits, and the rabbits then bleed internally for days and die this horrible slow death. And unless you kill all the rabbits, which they haven't been able to do, the rabbit populations keep coming back up, and they have to hit them again. And so I think in that context of compassion conservation, people are like, we just shouldn't be killing animals without reason. So I'm sympathetic about their concerns. What I would say is that what they haven't done well is say, like, we need to look at the whole cost benefit analysis comprehensively, right? And saying that killing is bad is compared to what, right? You can imagine an animal that's really suffering out there. Is it worse to kill that animal or to leave it? Is eating meat is always bad? Well, compared to what, right? Like, there are populations of wildlife out there that the only way to get funding for conservation, so that local communities are able to afford to conserve those species, is apparently through trophy hunting programs, right? So in that context, maybe what you really do for animal welfare is say, like, it's not that you say no killing, right? Because here are your two choices. One choice, um, there's no trophy hunting. The local communities don't have any resources to conserve, so they go out there and they hunt the animals and they eat them, right? And the animal, because the tragedy of the commons, and because the local communities may not have the be empowered with the governance tools they need, maybe that species might be out hunted or overhunted or whatever. Um, or the second choice is you say, okay, the community agrees to forego their own hunting, but for every trophy animal that is hunted, they get 95% of the profits, which then can fund their livelihoods, right? So in that situation, I'm an animal welfarist, but I would say that maybe it's better to have a like a very ethical trophy hunting paradigm, relatively ethical, than to have nothing. And so I think that real life context was it was underdeveloped in the compassionate conservation literature initially, and maybe it's advanced in the last few years. I haven't been able to follow it completely, but I think that if it's talking about how to incorporate animal welfare into a broader set of values, instead of just saying that these are the rules, we're going to follow them every part of the of the globe, no matter what the context. I think that there's maybe hopefully more appetite for that. Paul, if you could put your hand down, and Ravi, I think you've unmuted, so please go ahead. Okay. All right. So I'll continue now. I'll share my screen again. Okay. So this just kind of, I think, actually following along the lines of what um, Paul said. I think that um, I think a reasonable. I'll address the plant thing in a moment. I think that's an important point as well. So what it would look like if conservation consider animal welfare with everything else? Like so kind of what exactly am I advocating for if I'm not advocating for compassionate conservation? So I want to kind of just give an example from my own experience and ask you what you think. So I was working in India. I helped raise funds for a wild elephant collaring project in the Northeast. I think actually it was the first wild elephant collaring project, scientific collaring project in Northeast India. Um, and the idea was to get understanding of how elephants in that part of the world, the second largest population of wild Asian elephants, how they use their habitat. Like where do they actually spend their time? How much time do they spend in so-called natural spaces versus anthropogenic landscapes like tea estates and agricultural fields? Where do they go? Are they going from Assam to Arunachal? Are they staying in Assam? Do males and do males and females act a little differently? How do different herds behave? And it's very small number of individuals, but like that was the idea. If we want to help protect elephants, we need to know what the resource base they're using and how they're behaving a little better than we do. So I participated in helping raise funds for that, and we got the money we needed to start the projects. And when we did our first collaring, the elephant that we collared, it's quite rough. We end up briefly separating a mother elephant from her calf and the rest of her herd. We put the collar on, and then over the next couple of days, the mother was reunited with her herd. So it wasn't a long term, you know, big long term or big welfare loss as far as I know for the elephant. But the elephant also has to wear this collar, right? Like we don't know we hope the collar is comfortable in the elephant, but we can't do anything about it if it's not. The elephant can't tell us that. But to me, the thing that really bothered me is that I didn't know this, but my colleagues actually took some of the money we raised for the collaring and they bought a bunch of chicken lunches for all the people who participated, right? And these are not, I mean, these are broiler chickens, right? These are not, free range chickens that live a good life. And I don't know if you can slaughter an animal humanely, but if there is, there's a spectrum of really bad and really good. This was not necessarily in the very good slaughtering, right? I've seen a lot of chicken slaughtered in Assam. There's no standard operating procedure. So these are broiler chickens that likely suffered quite a bit. And so we put money towards that um, that in that industry. And so the question is, in this particular context, did my participation in this program, did it lead to more harm or to more good? Does anyone want to tell me your assessment? Do you think that this collaring program, was likely to the effort was likely to lead to more harm or more good. If we're collaring elephants, but then we're paying for chicken lunches for all the participants. What do people think? Aminita, please, you first.
Yeah, so I've been sort of mulling this over, and I think I have more of a visceral, emotive problem with the suffering versus the slaughtering, if we can figure out humane slaughtering. And I come up against a wall with this because this also means that you have to have the infrastructure and build out infrastructure for humane slaughtering and free range, happy lives chicken, and all of the sort of underpinnings of setting that up are also a global north, global south discussion. Like the idea that there is space to grow a whole bunch of chickens happily when potentially that doesn't exist for humans in this country, and then to consider if you should or should not spend money on chicken lunches. It's a little more complex than I can wrap my head around at this moment. But I think my primary thing here is, if this is the chicken that was available, it takes us a deeper reading into what that means. Like, okay, so only broiler chicken is available at this price point in this country, and people do want to eat it. So what does that mean in comparison to the funds being used for collaring? And I think for me, the suffering really is the problem of this issue more than anything else, because that I have mulled enough. But this other part is just my limited experience with thinking about what are the options, is where I'm stuck.
That makes sense. Tarsh, do you want to say something?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts, Nitin. First is this question of additionality almost. Like, would these people be eating chicken anyway? So it's not that you have directly caused or promoted the growing of whatever 10 chickens maybe for 40 people out of 800 billion or whatever number there is. So have these funds actually uh, resulted in the death of extra chickens is a complex one. Two is yeah, this is a more kind of complex point, but kind of some points have been mentioned in the whole idea of caste as well, right? In India, the whole question of vegetarianism is linked to caste inherently. So the question of giving somebody chicken is, in a sense, dealing with pushing back at arguably other societal problems. Even the Lantana teams, for example, every once a week they want to eat a chicken meal, and that's part of the expenses that once a week they want it. And I would be hesitant to push back against it because it is reinforcing a certain hegemonical approach to as a funder in particular. So those power dynamics. So when you talk of costs and benefits, I think the point I'm making is that it cannot be only ecological costs. You have to also think of more complex kind of social structures that are involved in this when these decisions are made. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anyone else?
Can I go?
Please, Monica. Yes.
Yeah, one more additional point is socio-economic factor. Like a person who is in a normal wage person who can't afford a country hen egg will definitely go for the broiler hen egg. So the socio-economic factor and it's more important in this case when they are going to look for a product or a food source. They're just going to go and buy which is available for them, which is affordable for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, just a minute. Oh, please, Anu, please, go ahead. Yeah. Last point, then we'll keep going. Yeah,
Sorry, I had a question.
please.
So basically, Sunita Narayan had written an article a few years back saying that in India, the average consumption of meat per year is 3 to 5 kilos. In contrast, in America, it's around 130 to 150 kilos or something like that per year, per person. So do we really think it's a huge, big issue in India when people on average eat 3 to 5 kilos of meat per year? And, in villages and all of that, and India's 70% of the population lives in villages, it's mainly sourced from somebody's backyard. It is only the middle classes that are eating chicken from farms.
So I'm not sure that that latter point is correct anymore. I think my understanding is that intensive farming has spread quite a bit. And that's the statistics that 80% of the chickens being eaten now are broiler. And because of, I think what Monica said is correct, that it is less expensive in many contexts, it's less expensive to produce chickens in intensive context than and giving an animal a good life costs money, right? Any of us who have a pet recognize that. Space costs money, requires resources. I mean, if you're in a free range situation, and the animals are eating refuse from your kitchen, and that's not, that space may not be the biggest constraint, but investing in their protection, making sure that they're treated if they have an infection, all those things cost money. And but yeah, so I think that these questions are absolutely the right ones, in the sense that it's not just is something good or bad, is eating meat good or bad. And as I said, I don't think that's the right question. I think the question is about what what are our options, and if we include animal welfare considerations in our option set, can we get to a better optimum with respect to all the values that we're talking about? Human rights, human nutrition, not reinforcing historical oppressive structures like caste, but also making sure that animals don't suffer unnecessarily. And so, to me, from my perspective, I don't want to live a life where, it's like, sure, it's only one chicken out of 80 billion, or it's only, one meal. Maybe Darsh, you're right that of the 40 people we fed, half of them were gonna have chicken anyway, but probably not all of them. Part of the reason they're excited is because they don't always buy meat for lunch, right? Like, so when it's on my organization's dime, they're willing to do that. And so there may be only additional 4 or 5, 6 chickens, 10 chickens that were hurt. But the question, or maybe just 3 in this case, because one chicken pays more than one person. But like, for me, I don't want to cause additional harm, to individuals, right? Because for that individual, that's their whole life. They have one shot. I don't believe in reincarnation. So like, that individual has one shot at life. They're living their life. Their life value is valuable to them. And so the question to me is: are there ways to satisfy all these interests while minimizing the harm that individuals experience? Okay, so I'm just in the interest of continue to move on. I actually think that in this particular case, I probably did more harm than I did good, and I think that this is looking at the whole thing. So the track record in our organization of translate, and in India in general, because a lot of issues with government and data, the track record of translating collaring data to action is not great, right? So the probability that the collaring project we did was ultimately going to lead to benefits for lots of elephants or lots of people who are struggling to coexist with elephants is reasonable. Hopefully something happens. I'm still hopeful, right? I still think that's a positive chance, and we should continue to do that kind of research. I'm saying that the expected benefits are relatively low. The collared elephant that they did have kind of a rough day, right? It's not pleasant to be, tranquilized and then collared and then wake up and then be separated from your calf and have to go find them. So there was some small, hopefully, in this case, it was temporary harm that was caused in that, to that animal. And I do think I help support a gruesome industry. I think it's very true that if you are if you're a person struggling to get enough protein, struggling to have enough food, all your, or even if you have access to food, but then you have very reasonable economic aspirations to go above sort of the lifestyle that you have to have some more security, and you want to invest in you don't want to spend all your money on meat. The dal for some reason is too expensive, and the most affordable form of protein for you is a broiler chicken, a broiler egg. I think there's a justification in that, for that individual to do that. At a society-wide level, to me, what it says is we should make sure that healthy, ethically sourced protein, mostly vegetable, not just because of the ethics of animals, but because from an ecological standpoint, plant protein is way, way, way more sustainable than animal protein. And I'm working on that now in my current job. I'm happy to talk about it at length if you'd like. So at a systems level, we should make sure that people have access to great protein. But yes, at individuals, if that's a protein they can afford, then they should have it. In our case, my organization, if we wanted to provide people chicken, if that was and for whatever cultural reason, if that was a priority, then we could have afforded to invest in more ethically sourced and Amrit, if it exists, ethically slaughtered chickens, right? And we didn't do that. So in my case, I think there was an alternative. We could have provided really nutritious vegan meals. We could have provided more ethically sourced animal meals if they, if we could have found them. But we didn't take those, right? And I don't think for me, I don't think that the social benefits of making people, feel that that they are getting something that they expect. I don't think that outweighs the life of suffering that we were supporting through this. And obviously, different people will come to different conclusions, but I'm just saying that animal welfare should be, in my ideal, part of the calculus here of how you make these decisions. Okay, so this is where Tharsh may be able to help me, is the next case study. So there was a tiger named T23. They started capturing him on camera traps when he was about 3 years old in the Mudumalai, Gudlore, etc. area. And so this tiger, lived a full life. And at the age of 14 or so, I guess the belief is that he was outcompeted by other dominant males and pushed the outside of core wildlife habitat territory. And so this tiger began killing people. And so I believe over maybe 5-6 months, I have it written down, but I think it was about 4 people were killed over 5-6 months. And the frequency of him being sighted in human inhabited areas was increasing. There was camera trap. And he killed 2 people in relatively quick succession in September-ish of 2021. So naturally, the local communities were very scared, right? Because, there's a human killing and eating tiger walking around. So the chief wildlife warden at the time had a choice. And I happened to be in Mudumalai when he and his team were making this choice. They could either have their field, the trackers that were in the field go out there and try and shoot the tiger to kill it, or they could try and tranquilize it and take it into captivity for the remainder of its life. Now, there are a couple of logistical things here, right, that are important to consider. You can shoot and kill a tiger from a greater distance than you can tranquilize it. So in order to try and capture a tiger for captivity, you have to have your field teams, which are, you guys have most of you have worked with folks who are field staff for the forest department. Extremely skilled, extremely intelligent, but often not super privileged, right? And so they would have to get close to this human-eating tiger, who's already in some distress, closer in order to tranquilize it than to shoot it, right? So there is some sort of cost there. Versus, and so that also means that if you had to get closer, you're probably going to take longer to get close to this tiger than if you just shoot the tiger from a distance once you identify it, see and identify it. So yeah, so I'm curious if people want to talk about what they would do in this situation. What do they think they would decide what course of action they would take? So, Tyler, should I leave out any important details you think are salient to this?
Yeah, I think one is it's much harder to tranquilize a tiger compared to shooting it. So the likelihood of it killing more people is always there. And it possibly happened. One more person got killed in the interim of when they were discussing what they should do. And that may have been avoided if it was put down. Two is after it was captured, it didn't go to a zoo. Wild tigers
don't
are
give
not
away the
allowed to
story,
go to
Darsh.
zoos.
Just kidding.
In India, tigers that are captured from the wild cannot be displayed in zoos. That's a whole other kind of legislative issue. They go into holding facilities away from the public that nobody sees. So, what is the condition of that tiger that is still alive today? Nobody really knows. It's a facility that is cut off from any public people, anyone from the public seeing it. And I informally kind of have heard that because of the beef ban in Karnataka, combined with the high cost of mutton, it's only being fed chicken. So that whole facility where they hold these tigers are only being fed chicken. So So that's another kind of thing to think about what is the life this tiger is going to lead afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Darsh. Those are very helpful. Yeah, I actually didn't. I forgot it wasn't put in a zoo. Thank you for adding that, especially. Anyone want to volunteer to be the chief wildlife warden and tell me what you would do in this situation? No, actually, I was just gonna say, I promise with a reaction to you, Ravi. I want someone who does not have actual management experience. Maybe we'll do you after we do someone who's a little bit less experienced. Anyone who hasn't actually made these real life decisions or contribute to them as Ravi has. Go first. Someone who hasn't spoken yet. Be brave. Okay, I might just randomly call on someone if no one volunteers. Would that be preferred? Okay, it's preferred. Bipanchi Tamuli, are you still with us? Okay, no reaction. Vignesh, would you be willing to volunteer or be voluntold? Okay, no response from Vignesh. All right, I'm gonna Iravati. Iravati, I feel like you would be able to tackle this.
Am I
Would you
audible?
mind? Yes, you are.
Okay, great. I was just typing my answer actually. Yeah, so in this situation, assuming that there was good infrastructure available for the tiger in a zoo, probably as a state wildlife warden, I would have preferred that option. Given that it could lead to, say, opportunities for education for people, and there is at least some scope of providing a quality of life for that individual tiger.
Thank you, Iravati. Great. Anyone else? One more person, then we'll ask Ravi. I can volunteer someone else if no one else is volunteering themselves. Okay, yes. I guess Seema?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm just
I forgot who
volunteering.
was the Coexistence Consortium one. Yeah, go ahead, Seema. Please.
Yeah. I'm just going to be the devil's advocate, because she volunteered to try to capture it for the zoo. I'm going to be advocating to kill and shoot the tiger. And there is a lot of this that happens, at least when it comes to elephants in the West Bengal sector, where they have given, the chief wildlife warden has given orders to kill elephants. So I don't think it's a very difficult job at the point, but you can actually make that call. It just needs a tough decision at that moment, but people do take decisions. So I think I'm going to go with shoot the tiger.
Thank you, Seema. Okay, Ravi.
No, I mean, I've actually never managed, but I've been engaging with these issues for a long time, going back to the 80s in Gir.
That's what I meant. Yes. Sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah.
When there was a spate of attacks on people, and when at the very minimum I said these animals need to be captured ASAP, the response of the managers were that we were 1 billion people, but we had only 300 lions, and the lions should take priority. And it's a very strange way they think about these things, because they're not putting themselves or their families in the position of the local communities having to deal with these really dangerous animals. And this is somebody I knew very well, so I could say it's not your mother or father who's dying, so it's easy for you to say. And the Chief Wildlife Warden has absolute powers under the Wildlife Protection Act. It's just that they never exercise it because they're worried about press, the conservation mafia, the political masters. It's all public relations rather than real management. And my call would have been it ends the agony for the animal. Captivity is no way, even the best of captivity is no way good for a 14-year-old wild tiger. It's come to its natural end, more or less. And the act of capture, the act of captivity, in whatever, I mean, 50-hectare cage also is not anywhere near what the quality of life that animal enjoy.
Well, you're validating me, Ravi. So this is my assessment. I felt the benefits of tranquilization. The tiger might get a few more days of life, as Ravi said, probably not too long, because it was already fairly old, and had suffered the stresses of life in the wild. Another advantage is that the chief wildlife warden would get less heat from the animal rights activists who are in Chennai filing petitions saying that you shouldn't kill a tiger. So that is a benefit that at least the chief wildlife warden is salient, but in the big picture of things, we might consider to be relatively small. And there's also some less risk of killing the wrong tiger. This is one that I am particularly sympathetic towards because you have to identify the right tiger and then, in the field, make sure it's the one that's actually causing a problem and kill that and not accidentally kill some other tiger. So to me, that's a substantial benefit. The cost, on the other hand, low paid staff have to get close to the tiger to dart it, increasing risks. As Darsh was saying, it's harder to actually dart than to shoot a tiger, so local communities may have to wait longer, continuing to worry about getting taken by tiger until the animal is captured. The wild tiger may not like being in captivity. So as Ravi was saying, like we might think it's better to be in captivity than die, but like that, like have you been in the wild for your whole life? These strange people come and capture you. They put you in this facility. Darsh said we don't even know how good the facility is. That might not be great. And as Darsh said, this tiger is going to be fed chickens, right? I mean, even I don't know, even if there wasn't a beef ban, chicken might be the cheapest meat in a lot of situations. So that's I asked ChatGPT. We did some calculations. It's about 4 chickens of meat a day, right? So that's how much you're supporting a pretty unethical industry for the life of a tiger who has had a great life in the wild, and it's not really clear what that's worth. Um, One cost, the chief wildlife warden might actually take more heat from human rights activists than for trying to tranquilize instead of kill. In fact, I saw that happening in real time. There were representatives from the local legislature that were and panchayat that were pressuring the chief wildlife warden. So there are political costs on both sides, and I don't think that shouldn't be what the chief wildlife warden is making decisions based on. But from their perspective, I think that's something they would consider. Very briefly, I want to keep going before, and we're already
Yeah,
wrong.
just a brief one saying this less risk of killing the wrong tiger. It works for tranquilization also. There's no guarantee of capturing the right tiger.
That's right. But once you capture it, if it's a wrong tiger, you can identify it, you can revive it. It's reversible in a way.
Don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I would say this is a difficult assessment. I would definitely I would have advocated for, as long as you can identify the tiger with enough confidence, I would say they should have killed that tiger. Um, but my point is not that there's a clear right or wrong. My point is that animal welfare should be part of the assessment. The tiger welfare should be part of the assessment, and the chickens that we're going to be fed the animal should be part of the assessment. It shouldn't be all about this is a charismatic megafauna species. We have to save it at all costs, no matter what, because that doesn't make sense, right? We can't. I know it's simpler to think of the world in that way, but it's not fair. Okay, so I think we're basically out of time. So we can do Silver Montserrat another one another time. But well, I mean, actually, Seema, I'm happy to stay if you want, but if we can also wrap up, what do you think?
We can do this quickly, like in another 5-10
Okay.
minutes. Yeah.
Fine. Okay. So Silver Montserrat was I think it's one of the elephants that you guys followed, right? Shilotras, Darsh. And
Yeah.
so he was injured in a fight with another tusker. He got gored in his hindquarters. And the wound gradually grew worse and worse over months. And over, I think, maybe a longer period of time, not immediately within months, but Darsh told me that this elephant previously was very kind to, like, didn't bother with people, but gradually, was in constant pain, might have become a little more aggressive. So after a few months, the DFO had a choice. Several people wanted the elephant to be captured and treated for its infection. But others you wanted believe that you should let nature take its course, right? Because the elephant was killed in a fight with another elephant. It wasn't killed due to human intervention. So what would you do? So in the interest of time, I'll let one person who has not spoken give me their give me their thoughts. And again, I will pick someone randomly if or semi-randomly if no one volunteers. But it'd be great if someone volunteered. Really want to encourage volunteering. Someone? All right, D. Great. Nice to see you, kind of.
Right. Uh, so for me, this isn't as much a question of animal welfare as it is a question of limits to what human beings think is part of their business or not. So I would say that because I was thinking about the Doubleday paper about Machli, which is this tiger that was resuscitated by the forest department for a long period of time because of this attachment and all of that. And I was thinking that perhaps we also have to consider how much is uh, part of our responsibility, quote unquote, you know, of getting in there and doing something. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Okay, so then your choice would be to let nature take its course. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I don't know if you said yes, Steve, but tell me if I'm
Yes,
wrong.
yes,
Otherwise, we'll
sorry.
continue.
Yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
yeah.
Great. Cool. Okay. All right. Awesome. So that's great because D and I are, I think, on opposite sides of this. But I think they're both uh, uh, reasonable positions. My assessment in this case was that there are a couple of benefits. One is that this elephant, sure, is suffering for so-called natural reasons, but I don't really put much stock in nature as a ethical justification. I think you know what's natural and unnatural to me feels very arbitrary. For instance, maybe this elephant was fighting on a road built by people and at a disadvantage. If the road hadn't been there, maybe this elephant would have. I mean, you know. Also, are we not natural? If you believe in evolution, we're humans. We humans evolved from other primate species, and so doesn't that make us natural as well? At what point did we become something that should be seen as separate? I think Raman Sukumar told me that, and I think Uma Ramakrishnan also said this, that like basically there's evidence that tigers might have only come to India in the last 25 to 30,000 years, whereas humans have been in India for 60,000 years. So does that mean the tigers are less natural here, that we are the ones that should have priority? So the whole idea of nature is very, very contrived. And you might even argue that it's sort of an outgrowth of the Judeo-Christian worldview of, there's humans and everything else is created for humans, and that's something separate. God comes, so it's a quasi-religious belief in my view. So to me, the question is about ultimately what's going to lead to better outcomes, right? Especially in terms of suffering and quality of life, both for humans and non-humans. And so to me here, the benefits of intervening are less so for this specific elephant, right? In this specific case, if the elephant had died quickly or was going to die quickly, intervening might not have been worth it because you spend a lot of resource to catch this elephant. It may or may not heal. It's going to be difficult for the elephant to go through all that. And I don't think death is something we should avoid at all costs. But in this case, it was a slow, painful, horrible, festering injury that caused harm for years, right? And when we say we love elephants, does that mean we only love elephants because we like looking at them because they're pretty? Or do we care about their life experience? Do we care about what they're going through and their quality of life? So for me, that's the big benefit. The cost, public funds, right? And there's some risk also. Anytime people are involved in this operation, there's some risk. But in Guatemala, they're pretty good at it. In this rural area, they're pretty good at it. So there's some funds for capture and treatment. But I see animals as citizens as well in some way. And I think that the benefits outweigh the cost. Okay, so last thing I'll say, I think for me, these are complex issues in many cases, and I think it's there's no clear right and wrong. But to me, this is the right thing to do to start considering animal welfare in a systematic, rational, empathetic, loving way. I think it's the most interesting thing to do, right? I think people are engaged in this conversation because these are weighty, complicated, intellectually vexing questions. I think that incorporating animal welfare into our work would shift our priorities, right? I think that more people might decide one in a way that says, okay, let's treat that elephant in the last example, Silver Monstra. If we consider animal welfare as an interest of its own, and not just consider animals as there for human consumption or appreciation. Um, and and the last thing I just want to say is, like, please, as we move forward, think about how what you do affects animals. And I see a little debate going on the right here about veganism, vegetarianism, plant suffering. I on the plant thing, I'll say two things. One is that there isn't a consensus that plants suffer, and in a way that we recognize. I'm not saying it's not possible that they do in their own independent evolutionary path, that they have developed some things that we should value. But I think that we should use science here. And I think if you were to ask the same questions to ChatGPT or try to look for a consensus statement on plant suffering, you wouldn't find one. But even if there were, when you're raising animals in captivity, you are, I think on average, it's for every 12 calories you feed an animal, you get 1 calorie out, right? It's a little bit, chickens are a little more efficient, 7, 8, 9 calories. Beef is much less efficient. Um, but even if you value plants, you have to kill a lot more plants to save an animal, to keep an animal alive so you can eat it, than if you just eat the plant directly. So there are many, 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 many hard problems of conservation. And I think the question of access to food security, nutrition, all of those things are super important. Caste is, if you ask me, the absolute worst human institution in history across the world. I don't think more people have suffered for anything than due to caste. We should absolutely make sure that all people are treated with dignity and respect, and caste, kill it as quickly as possible. I don't think there's any value in maintaining caste at all. So all these things are complicated. But if on a day-to-day basis you have the choice of either eating a healthy meal from plants or eating animal products, from a sustainable perspective and an animal welfare perspective, this is not a difficult choice. That's a straightforward choice. And so I think that if you want to source your plant-based foods from business holders, from communities that don't have as much, even better, right? There's other ways to improve on that front. But I don't think that this is as complicated. And I'm happy to. I'm specializing in this issue now. I'm happy to do another presentation on this another time. Okay. I think we're well out of time. Unless someone has a burning question or comment, I'll turn it over to Darsh and Seema.
I don't have. Tash, go ahead. You had your hand raised for a while. Do you want
No, nothing.
No, now it's done. Okay.
It was about Silva Monstra, but I think that's fine.
Okay.
You can close it now.
Yes, thank you for the session. First of all, Nitin, I have like so many things going in the chat box. I think you might want to read them. There was one person who said that we should have come ahead and do a debate on animal welfare versus wildlife conservation and how it is. There are a lot of comments about great talk, and thank you so much for doing this, Nitin. Like, thank you so much for doing the talk. It was quite interesting. And the one thing that I appreciate a lot, which I even was telling Samira, you know that we all don't agree to you a lot of times, but you still come across and put forward your point of view. And then you're always open to these discussions, Nitin. And that's the beauty of it. And that's what I really like about the consortium, as well as this platform where you can disagree on a lot of things. I hope that says.
Thanks. Well, no, I mean, I learn a lot from you, and I think I get better as a result of these disagreements. So it's, but yeah, no, I really appreciate this forum and all of you who contribute to continue to keep this institution alive. After its, since its inception several years ago. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Nitin. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You.
Bye.